Well, hello and welcome to another online Bible study with Pastor Bill Brown. This is for our morning worship service. Of course, you can be watching this at any time. We hope that you are being blessed by this series. This will, in fact, be number 24 in this particular series of the gospel in the books of Moses, taken from John chapter 5 and verse 46, where Jesus was interacting with the Pharisees and told them, if you really did believe in Moses, you'd believe in me, for he wrote of me. And we've been looking for several weeks at every one of the places that we can find, and some digging in deep, some we've wanted to give you multiple messages, but then finding just the riches. Like last week, we started with the brazen serpent, and we really wanted to get into the brazen serpent, the rod that budded, and then Phineas, and show you Christ in those three messages. Well, we stopped short, just give you a little shorty message, but that's not the way I preached it live. I will tell you, though, that one was about 22 minutes. We went 38 minutes live in the auditorium, a little bit longer. Today may be somewhat the same a little bit. We're going to be looking at the rod that budded. This, of course, is Aaron's rod. Again, a wonderful, rich story. If you are not familiar with all of these stories that I'm giving to you out of the Old Testament, in particular out of the first 5 books of the Bible, I would encourage you to go in and read, because then when you go back in and look at those stories with New Testament eyes, oh, it gets good. But there's a little bit of drama in this one. And so it's kind of rich when we begin to look at, and of course, one of the things that we'll look at is these men that were discussing this with Jesus denied what Moses was really teaching and denied Jesus as the Christ. And he told them that there's one that would be their accuser, and that was Moses, who they thought they believed in. Moses was going to accuse them. Well, what does that tell you? There's a judgment day coming. And that judgment day has not yet come, but let me tell you, there is a day in which you and I will be judged before the Lord. Or you can be judged in Christ and be safe in Him, kind of like our cities of refuge. Well, we're beginning again with Aaron's rod that budded, and that starts in Numbers chapter 17. But before I get there, and that's a little bit of a long passage to read, I want to give you some background and, again, add to a little bit of the drama. And so we're going to begin kind of with a genealogy a little bit, but I'm not going to take too much time in going through it. But we are going to start with Jacob. If you remember that God had given Abraham a promise that his family would be as big as the sands of the seas, the stars. If you can number them, you're going to be able to number your family. Well, that promise, not only of a huge family, but also of the promised seed, which goes back to Genesis 3:15, talking about the Messiah, is going to come through Abraham. Now, you remember Abraham had 2 sons, but of those 2 sons, it was Isaac who was the chosen one, and not the other. Then you had Isaac had 2 sons with Esau and Jacob, and it was Jacob who had the promise that it would be his family that you would follow and see the Messiah and more. Now, along with that, if you know much about Jacob, he had 12 sons. And so you'll see their names pop up on the screen, and you'll see one that's highlighted right below him, which is Levi. And there's a reason for that, because that's going to tell us a little bit more about our story and why we all have this. So the Levites were the tribe that was appointed to be the priesthood. You can read that in Numbers 1 and 50. They were appointed over the tabernacle. They were the ones that were in camp set up directly around the tabernacle. They were in charge of everything internally, and they were even in charge of setting it up and tearing it down. But it was not just them. They had other family members of the priesthood. So Levi had 3 sons. And Kohath is the one that we're going to pay particular attention to. And then Kohath, he had 4 sons. And you'll see their names below his. And one, which is directly below him, which is Amram. If you remember that name, it might strike a little bit of familiarity. That Amram, and we know his wife's name was Jochebed. And Amram and Jochebed gave birth to Moses and Aaron. Now, it's also interesting that when we follow that, you see that Levi, and then you've got Kohath, Amram, and then Aaron. And it isn't until we get to Moses and Aaron that we have the choosing of the leader of Israel to deliver them from out of the hand of Egypt, to confront Pharaoh. And Aaron, we see him being chosen as the high priest, and his sons as the primary priesthood that would work and serve within the tabernacle itself. In fact, we see in Numbers chapter 16 and verse 3, or verses 9 and 10, let me get down here where I'm at, but it says, "And thou shalt give the Levites unto Aaron." So all of those other tribes are involved in the Levitical priesthood, but it's Aaron who's in charge. You see it. "And thou shalt give the Levites unto Aaron and to his sons, and they are wholly given unto him out of the children of Israel. And thou shalt appoint Aaron," this is from God, "thou shalt appoint Aaron and his sons, and they shall wait on their priest office." And look at the warning that's underneath that. "And the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death." So this was a very, very serious order and divine appointment. Problem is that when you go back into Numbers 16, just prior to the story that we're going to read this morning, in chapter 3, it talks about they gathered themselves. Who gathered themselves? Oh, there was a man by the name of Korah. Now, he was not of Amram, he was of Ishar, and here he was appointing kind of himself. In fact, he questioned. Listen to what it says in Numbers 16:3. "They gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said unto them, Ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore," he says, "then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord." In other words, you're self-appointed, and who put you in charge? That's kind of what they were saying. Korah, maybe he saw this as nepotism, that Moses put his brother in charge. But the fact is that Moses didn't appoint Aaron, God did. So Korah led this rebellion, but God ended it rather quickly by a challenge. "Okay, Korah, you get all your incense and your men, and we're going to take Aaron and his men." And Moses basically says, "If Korah, you and your family, if you die a natural death, then this wasn't of the Lord. But if you die a pretty fantastic death here, then is of the Lord." And you know what happened, of course, if you've read it or familiar with it, the earth opened up, swallowed Korah and all that pertained to him, and then closed back up. Oh my goodness. A rather staggering series of events, very dramatic. There were some other men, Dathan and so on, that also had a problem and died as a result of that. And then there were 14,700 who died from a plague that God sent because of this rebellion. Now, in that rebellion, Aaron grabbed the censer and incense, and he went in among the people to stay the plague. Now we come to this story. You would think this was over, that would settle the matter once and for all, because all of Israel fled the scene. When they saw the earth open up and swallow Korah and all his family, all his tents, everything, everyone, they're gone. What did he say? "And the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death." Well, they were indeed. So let's now go into Numbers chapter 17. You've got a little bit, again, of the rebellion, what has taken place, and now we've got that God's going to set this in order and make sure that the people of Israel understand that Aaron is by divine appointment the high priest, and his sons are in charge of the tabernacle. So let's look. Number 17. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and take every one of them a rod according to the house of their fathers, and of all their princes according to the house of their fathers 12 rods. Write thou every man's name upon his rod, and thou shalt write Aaron's name upon the rod of Levi, for one rod shall be for the head of the house of their fathers. And thou shalt lay them up in the tabernacle of the congregation before the testimony. Talking about the ark, where I will meet with you. And it shall come to pass that the man's rod, whom I shall choose, shall blossom, and I will make to cease from me the murmurings of the children of Israel, whereby they murmur against you. And Moses spake unto the children of Israel, and every one of their princes gave him a rod apiece, for each prince one, according to their fathers' houses, even 12 rods. And the rod of Aaron was among their rods. And Moses laid up the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. And it came to pass that on the morrow Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded. Now, I have to pause because think about this. We're talking about a rod, a walking staff, a dead stick that's long been dead. And yet, here it is. It not only has budded, but notice, and brought forth buds, and bloomed blossoms, and yielded almonds. And Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord unto the children of Israel, and they looked and took every man his rod. And of course, we know that it was Aaron's rod that budded. And the Lord said unto Moses, Bring Aaron's rod again before the testimony, to be kept for a token against the rebels, and thou shalt quite take away their murmurings from me, that they die not. Well, what do we learn? We learn certainly that his office was of divine origin. Again, support that again in 1 Chronicles 23 and 13, where again it says, And Aaron was separated. He was separated from all of the others, that he should sanctify the most holy things, he and his sons forever, to burn incense before the Lord, to minister unto him, and to bless his name forever. What do we learn from that is that his being high priest, his office was of divine origin. Now I'm going to tell you how important it is that Christ had an office as well. He is our priest. He is our great high priest, and his being put into the priesthood was of divine origin, and it was validated in the same way that Aaron's was. The rod, again, remember, of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded and brought forth buds and bloomed and blossoms. So his particular position and authority and service, not only of himself, but his sons, it's not nepotism. It was ordained of God. Eleazar, who is his son and will be the next high priest, was also, it talks about the chief of the Levites that were working in there. And we see that all dispute was removed. When we begin to look at this and see, even in Numbers 17 and verse 10, And the Lord said unto Moses, Bring Aaron's rod again before the testimony, to be kept for a token against the rebels, and thou shalt quite take away their murmurings from me, that they die not. So we can see that divine office and who it was that was in it was validated. All dispute was removed, and there was a miraculous monument. Where was that monument? It was in the Ark of the Covenant. And that's why it was in there. So there would be no more murmuring about who was serving. Korah Well, who put you up to that? Who put you in charge? God did. And God was proving that particular story. Now, when you look at that and thinking through the New Testament and with New Testament eyes, you'll see the same in the office of Jesus Christ as our priest and our great high priest. Again, Aaron had that right lineage. He was sovereignly chosen and appointed to that office, and he was validated both through his words and his works, and that is the same with Jesus Christ. Christ was validated as the Messiah, as our great high priest through his words and his works, and all dispute was removed when he rose again from the dead. God took a dead rod, and it blossomed, it budded, and it produced almonds. Jesus Christ died, his body lay in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, and yet when he rose, so did others. It blossomed, it produced fruit. That's the thing that we can see. So when we begin to look at this, we can see a little bit further that the priesthood that we're looking at typified Jesus Christ, or our chosen or elect priesthood. And one of the things that you'll see, and that's why I said this is a big study that you could go for quite a while in looking at, was that our great high priest, or their priesthood, first of all, the priesthood typified Christ, but the priesthood was supposed to be a compassionate priesthood. And we see that following true, and I'll show you how they were supposed to be compassionate. And can you imagine a priesthood that wasn't compassionate? Their whole part was to minister from God to man, but also from man to God. They had to have compassion. Why were they taught that? Because Christ was going to have compassion. If you look at Hebrews chapter 5, verses 1 through 2, it says, "For every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men in things pertaining to God." So again, the priest was to be ministered between God and the man, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. But notice this, verse 2, "who can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are out of the way, for that he himself also is compassed with infirmity." The high priest was to be aware and have a sense of their own infirmities, their own frailties, their own sins. In fact, even the high priest, before he would ever make atonement for the sins of Israel, had to go in and make atonement for himself. Well, now, while Christ had no sin, he was a compassionate high priest who we'll see was touched with the feeling of our infirmities. Now, Aaron was by far not the most holy of high priests. We could go back and remind you, and I'm sure that Aaron would remember quite well, that he was the one who made the molten calf. He was the one when Moses asked him what happened. He says, "I don't know. I threw in the gold and out popped these 2 little cows. How about that?" Aaron was also partner to Moses when he struck the rock twice. And it is for that particular reason that Aaron was not allowed to go into the promised land either. In fact, look it up in Numbers chapter 20 and verses 12 and verse 24, and you'll read this phrase, "Aaron rebelled against my word at the water of Meribah." You'll also find out that both Aaron and Moses question the validity of Moses' authority. And Miriam got leprosy because of that. And of course, God healed her as well. But every Levitical priest and every Levitical high priest, Aaron included, had sin. And they needed to be humble enough to remember, to regret, and to recognize their infirmity, that they might be a compassionate priest for men in the things pertaining to God. There were numerous regulations regarding the fitness of the priest to minister to the Lord. In fact, they could not have any physical deformity, and a host of other requirements which might make them unclean. They had to be holy before their God. Why? Because their office was a type of Christ as our priest and his ministering. The high priest requirements were even stricter. In fact, you'll find out that the priest couldn't touch a dead body, but the regular priest, when their parents died, they could. They just stayed unclean until that evening. But the high priest could not touch even his mother or his father when they died. They could not abuse their office. And if you remember, there was a man by the name of Eli who both of his sons died in one day. And all of that because Eli did not remove them from attending to the Lord. Selfishly, he had no other sons to leave to that ministry, and he died a broken man and a broken neck and heart. The priest was to be involved in the things of men towards God. The prophet was to minister to men of the things of God, and Jesus Christ is our prophet, our priest, and our king. Let me show you again from that same chapter, again in Hebrews chapter 5. I'm just going to give you the one verse. Well, excuse me. Let me get you back to that verse. Just notice verse 1. For every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men. Men could not come on their own. They needed that priest, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices on their behalf. So all of those Israelites could not approach God directly. What they did have was a mediator, but they still had to be compassionate, for we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. We also see in Hebrews chapter 8, I got my slides out of order here a little bit in my mess up again. He was our mediator to pertain in those things offered unto God. Now I want to get to Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 6. But now he hath obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. My point in trying to go back to Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 1 was to show that the people needed a mediator. Moses was a mediator. Aaron was a mediator. The priests were mediators. And again, the priesthood was a type of Christ in that they had to be compassionate, aware of their own frailties. Well, while Christ had no sin, he did have the frailties of human flesh. He got tired. He got hungry. He got weak. There were things that he could not do. But he was appointed as our mediator. And you see that more specifically when Paul is writing to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 5, where he says, for there is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus. Even think about the high priest and how that he ministered to God on their behalf. If you remember that there was the name of the 12 tribes that were written on the chest of the high priest. And of course, he offered sacrifices on their behalf. Christ did not have to offer any sacrifices for himself. He stood, like the high priest did, he stood before God as the representative of the people. And it's interesting to note, too, it was the priest who declared who was clean and who was unclean. Well, Christ does the same for us. He bears our name before the throne of God. He offered himself as a sacrifice for our sins that we might be clean through his shed blood and broken body. He declares who are clean through him, through his shed blood. And I'm going to give you another one in a little bit too, that he intercedes on our behalf. Now, again, remember, and I want to tell you that Aaron and his sons, we looked at that, were the intercessors. And Aaron, in 23 and 13, Aaron was separated that he should sanctify the most holy things. He and his sons, how long? Forever. They were the intercessors, forever, to burn incense before the Lord, to minister unto him, and to bless his name forever. Again, that's the part of an intercessor. How did Christ typify that? Is because he is our intercessor. We see that in Hebrews 7, 24 and 25. But this man, because he continueth forever, Christ lives forever. He's eternal. Wherefore he is able to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for them. Jesus, as both God and man, is a superior, or we could say a better high priest than any of the Levitical priesthood or the Aaronic priesthood. He is an ever-living priest with an unchangeable priesthood. We have a superior high priest. We have a superior covenant. We have a perfect mediator. We have a compassionate mediator. We have a saving mediator. And we have a perfect intercessor that always pleads our case. A.W. Pink called this a supernatural, a spiritual, eternal, and secure deliverance that was provided for us. When I think about Christ, too, as our mediator, as that one who stands before us, and we talked about that monumental or miraculous monument, the Aaron's rod that budded that was put into the Ark of the Covenant. Think about the fact that you and I today also have a miraculous monument. We have the Lord's Supper that we celebrate, which looks back to the body and the blood of Christ that would shed for us, but it also looks forward to the fact that Christ is coming again to rule and reign. We've had him and have him as our priest and our prophet, and our king subdues us to his rule, but that king is coming back again. And there is no other name given under heaven whereby we must be saved. There is no other name that's given that has been so validated, that has so been completely and absolutely without any flaws, whatever, proven for us from his resurrection, that he is our high priest. He is the Messiah. If you've not yet come to Christ and have him as your high priest, as the one who ministers, cleanses, and purifies, come to him today. Christian, do you realize the work that Christ did on our behalf? How rich and how wonderful that we have a compassionate mediator and intercessor that can be touched with our feelings of our infirmities. I pray that that little bit that we've looked at has given you a little bit of a glimpse when we look at that rod that budded and the story of how God chose Aaron and how he placed him there and he removed all doubt from now on. And he did that for the rebels. But what happened when Christ came? The rebels stood against Christ. And they said, we have Moses. Jesus said, if you'd have believed Moses, you would have believed me. For he wrote of me. Let's look again next week and see a little bit more when we study Phinehas and the priesthood there. Lord bless you.